Is weird, odd, strange, or just plain bizarre is really your cup of tea? Then the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast will give you that fix. Can't believe it? Well, listen for yourself as we deliver the strangest news you definitely won't find on CNN or Fox. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast.
Papaphobia is the fear of the Pope. Welcome to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Crimson Caleb. Today we're going to start in the United Kingdom, where baboons were spotted with knives and chainsaws. Who didn't see that coming? And then we'll move on to a few celebrity stories, including a Johnny Depp story. And then we're going to wrap up with some hilarious crime stories that happened over the past week. And after that, I'm going to give you my top 10 weird scientist moments. It's going to be tons of fun. I'm sure you can hear the excitement in my voice. So let's get started with baboons armed with knives, chainsaws, and other weapons spotted in the United Kingdom on July 27th. So this occurred in a British safari park, and the baboons are described as a gang, quote, wrecking havoc, vandalizing vehicles, ripping off windscreen wipers and mirrors from the patrons of the facility. Their weapons include blades, screwdrivers, and chainsaws. All of those are plural, so they actually have multiple knives, multiple screwdrivers, and multiple chainsaws, which impresses me. That's more than my gang has. Now, this has encouraged some of the workers at the safari park to jump to the conclusion that these weapons were given to the baboons by, quote, thrill-seeking visitors. They go on to say, quote, we are not sure if they are being given weapons by some of the guests who want to see them attack cars, or if they're fishing them out of pickup trucks and vans. They will literally go into people's toolboxes and carry them around. One of the baboons was seen lugging around a chainsaw. Now look, I don't want to get political right off the bat. As we all know, UK has banned all firearms. So it's you know, you don't want to see baboons wandering through the streets of England with double-barrel shotguns. You know, we've already seen 6 terrible movies based on that. So we don't need to see any more of that. Anyways, the safari park also said, quote, we believe many of these stories have grown in exaggeration as they've been retold with embellishment to make the objects that are sometimes found in the enclosure seem more exciting and unbelievable. Now, I don't think embellishment is required when the story involves baboons walking around with knives and chainsaws. I think that story's as good enough as it is. And this isn't a small little dinky operation either. This is a 550-acre park. So these people should have the resources to, keep weapons out of the hands of their monkeys. But the safari also boasts that they house lions, tigers, rhinos, wildebeests, and camels. Half of those are probably more dangerous than baboons with knives and chainsaws, so I don't think they have anything to worry about. But this begs the question, what the H is a safari doing in England? That's like doing Jeep safari tours just north of New York City with lions, tigers, and rhinos running about. Of course something's going to go wrong. Of course a monkey is going to come across a chainsaw. Hopefully they don't figure out how to use it. I know plenty of people dumber than baboons who have figured out how to use chainsaws, so that's kind of worrying. Now, one of the mechanics who had his tools stolen actually talked to this news site, and what he said is, quote, people know what's going to happen when they drive inside. I've had 2 customers this year who have become victims of these baboons. I have a mate with a garage. I have a mate with a garage in St. Helens, and it's exactly the same. The kids start chirping up, saying they want monkeys all over the car, and the next thing you know, you're driving home with no registration plate. Good money for us, mind you, so I'm not complaining. So the mechanics business is now growing due to the fact that baboons with chainsaws are destroying cars, which I think is a better analogy than the broken window fallacy for those who have taken economics. You need to jump to your economy? Why not just hire some baboons with chainsaws to cut cars apart? Ah, the free market in progress. So, I took the same approach to this story as I'm now taking with every story, and I asked my weekly correspondent what he thought of this story. So, Robbie Canton said, quote, "Monkey see, monkey do." Good joke, Robbie. He also made the astute observation that this is why we should have never taught monkeys sign language, because first we teach them sign language, and now they're entering the industrial era. We've evolved monkeys too quickly. We need to slow down before they're on our level. And he also agrees with me that it doesn't make sense that baboons are in the United Kingdom. So, I think this is something brought on by the fault of the United Kingdom's people. So, you guys gotta work on that. Don't let baboons run wild through the beautiful streets of England. But I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. If you disagree with me, leave a comment. Let me know what your opinion is on knife-wielding baboons. But for now, it's my job to move on to our next animal story, which is my weekly Florida story of the week. 5,000 Burmese pythons removed from the Everglades. This story comes to us from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. So, they don't just conserve wildlife, they also conserve fish, which is great news. Thanks, Florida. Now, this organization went on to say, "This is another win for the Everglades. Every snake counts. Each invasive python eliminated represents hundreds of native wildlife saved." With Governor DeSantis' continued leadership, Florida is doing more than it ever has to remove pythons from the Everglades and protect this ecosystem for generations to come. So he's bragging about the fact that 5,000 snakes were removed from the Everglades during a 3-year period. Now, it should also be said that nobody really knows what the population of pythons is in the Everglades, so they don't know how much of a dent this represents in the overall population. But they are glad that now possums, rabbits, raccoons, and other animals can thrive in the ecosystem. I've always said we need more possums and raccoons. Anyways, in order to combat the species, the government is now paying trappers to capture and kill the pythons. They offer hourly rates for the time spent in the bush and cash bonuses for longer snakes. So they're actually having competitions now, monetarily based competitions, in order to reward trappers. I'd love to have that on my resume. Python trapper. Sounds like a euphemism. Now, they go on to say that these are pretty dangerous animals to try and catch, so don't do it unless you are a trained trapper. The animals are tan and have dark spots, and they like to hang out around water and slither up trees. That does not sound fun, a giant python in the trees waiting to jump on you when it has the right chance. Oh, Lord. Now, of course, normally Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commissions encourage relocation of dangerous animals, but the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission encourages residents to, quote, "kill wild-caught pythons whenever possible." Florida is my favorite news state because there is no subtlety, there's no BS about it. They're upfront about everything. But in case this story didn't make you squirmy enough, the largest snake caught in the Florida Everglades measured more than 18 feet long, which, according to my calculations, is about twice as long as a 9-foot-tall tree. Or 3 times as long as the average male human. So thank your lucky stars you don't live in Florida, unless you live in Florida, in which case thank your lucky stars you don't live in Cuba. They're now holding tournaments to catch big snakes. And so during the Super Bowl, they held a parallel tournament titled the Python Bowl, which saw 80 pythons brought down over the course of less than 24 hours. The number one prize was an all-terrain vehicle. So they take this stuff awfully seriously. They actually compare the pythons to a disease, saying that it completely devastates their ecosystem. And beyond that, it's unlikely that the state will ever fully get rid of the snakes, even though that is technically their stated goal. And they say that the boom in population of the pythons is due to the fact that they're escaping private homes. So these are pets. These are escaped pets that are wreaking havoc across all of the Everglades in Florida. And more than that, they also fear that the snakes will eventually move north into other states so that they will expand and become more and more devastating across more and more terrains. So if you see an 18-foot-long snake, call 888-483-4681. That's 888-483-4681. That's the same number you call, by the way, if you spot Bigfoot. And the astute viewer will notice that that's actually 888-I've got one. Alright, now we're going to wrap up with our third animal story, the last animal story for this segment, which takes place in the Mid-East, where car cleaning stations are being used to wash cows, which is just brilliant resourcefulness if you ask me. Now, the washing of animals instead of cars is actually a seasonal event. It usually comes every year around the Muslim festival of Eid al-Adha, which is my mispronunciation of the week. And it's an event in which the people take their cattle, sheep, and goats for a thorough scrub down in preparation for their sacrifice during the 3-day religious holiday. Now, the trend of using a car wash to wash your cow was initially started by the man who owned the car wash. He washed his own cow in preparation for the event, and has since said that the business has been booming every year before this annual event. He said, quote, "The people who saw me washing the animal came to me with their own. That's how this trend started." He employs a holiday discount, making it only around 60 cents per farm animal to wash, making it only around 60 cents per animal washed. It's estimated that in this man's fatherland of Pakistan alone, between 8 and 10 million animals are sacrificed every year during this holiday. And the man also notes that cleanliness is especially important because of the coronavirus pandemic this year. So they've seen an even bigger boom. As we learned in our last episode, animals can actually transmit the disease. I'm not sure how well it translates through cattle, but a cat got it, so I don't see why a cow couldn't. But this young entrepreneur boasts, "I make a point to sanitize the animal with disinfectants in order to avoid the spread of COVID-19. I hope you're taking notes, people. Don't just wear masks. Wash your hands and wash your goddamn pets once in a while. And this COVID thing will be over before we know it." Alright, stay tuned for after the break. We're going to get into some celebrity gossip. My favorite topic. Don't worry, it's going to be funny. It's not going to be gossip, I promise. Stay tuned for that, and later I'll give you my top 10 weird scientists and scientist experiments. Alright, stay tuned for that.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Bananas have more trade regulations than AK-47s. Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News Podcast. We're going to go over some celebrity stories. I've been dreading this topic, but it's going to be funny. I wouldn't do it unless it was. You guys know that. Okay, so our first story comes to us from Johnny Depp and his ex-wife Amber Heard. Apparently they traded blows in a unique fashion. They both found ways to use human waste as a weapon against each other. According to Depp, that's Johnny Depp, he accuses his wife of taking a dump on their bed, and she accuses him of using his, water waste in order to spell her name out after a violent fight. Apparently these two have been fighting both physically and verbally between the years of 2013 and 2016. Many of these confrontations qualify as abuse. So, you can keep that in mind every time you watch the remake of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, if that movie wasn't bad enough. Now you have to look at Willy Wonka as an abuser. That's sad. Now, apparently after Johnny Depp allegedly spelled his ex-wife's name with his own urine, they proceeded to wreck the entire rented house while fighting. They destroyed the entire house. It's like a bad plot out of an anime where the fight destroys the actual arena. And it climaxed with Johnny Depp's finger being severed. I know this is the last thing I should be laughing about, but it's just kind of funny that people can manage to, care about each other enough to get in these kind of fights and still stick together, even if it's only for 3 years. Now, here's the funny part. The funnier part. They had their estate manager, Ben King, testify at their hearings, and here's what he said. He said, quote, "He was quite sure that there was no urine in the home. I did not see any signs of urine, and I did not smell it, as I would have done had somebody urinated around the house." So you have it straight from the horse's mouth. Johnny Depp's urine was not found after the skirmish. I bet he did find it and then just sold it on the black market for hundreds of thousands of dollars. If I had hundreds of thousands of dollars, I would buy the biggest Lego I can, and then I would buy Johnny Depp's pee on the black market. I don't know about you guys. Now, Johnny Depp also says that he denies that he was capable of urinating his wife's name due to the fact that he had a severed finger. He claimed that his finger was severed after his wife hurled a vodka bottle at him, whereas Heard said he did it to himself during the attack, and he was so high that he couldn't remember it. Man, this is juicy. I sound like a tabloid person, don't I? We should probably move on pretty soon if this doesn't get any more heartwarming. Now, as for the poo that Amber Heard left on their bed, she blames the dogs. Which is a big jump up from a dog ate my homework to a dog took a dump on my bed, but, I think that's a fair accusation. Now, I'm going to stop the story there just because it's a bit serious, and this is their personal life, so I don't want to dive too deeply into it. I just thought it would be fun to bring up all the absurdities that were being claimed. It's hard to know what's true and what's not, obviously. All that's known is that it's not a good situation. My guess is they're both partially at fault and both partially victims. So, just keep that in mind. That's my moral evaluation of the week. That's why you guys come here, right? To hear my moral evaluation on celebrity stories. Okay. We're going to move on now to the viral sensation, Dr. Stella. Dr. Stella Emanuel, who says Jesus will destroy Facebook if her COVID video doesn't go back up. Now, as many people of the media know, Facebook has been banning any video claiming that hydroxychloroquine is a cure for COVID-19. They've been getting rid of those on their website because they, quote, believe it could do harm and actually deter people from finding an actual cure. But here's the thing, Dr. Stella Emanuel is actually a doctor. She's a Houston physician, and her recent video about hydroxychloroquine went viral on Facebook, and once Facebook took that video down, she declared on Twitter that Jesus Christ would destroy Facebook unless her video is re-uploaded. She said, quote, "Hello, Facebook, put back my profile page and videos up, or your computers will start crashing till you do. You are not bigger than God, I promise you. If my page is not back up, Facebook will be down in Jesus' name. Now, for those who haven't seen the clip, it took place during what is called a White Coat Summit, which is just a group of doctors, and it was in front of the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C., and they called themselves the Deliverance Ministers. And it's basically just a group of doctors who praise hydroxychloroquine and say how masks and lockdowns are not needed to stop the spread of the novel coronavirus. The same video was shared by pop star Madonna. Excellent. Which heavily contributed to its viral sensation. Madonna was also penalized for sharing this video in the form of her Instagram getting flagged. Now, according to the Texas Medical Board, Miss Emanuel is a licensed pediatrician, and she is also a religious minister who has, quote, a long history of making bizarre claims about medical topics and other controversial issues. Miss Emanuel refers to herself as, quote, God's battle axe and a weapon of war. Now look, you can agree with Miss Emanuel, you can disagree with her. Obviously, the general medical consensus disagrees with her, but it has to be noted that she does have some, I would agree, bizarre views. She says that infertility and impotence can be caused by sex with, quote, spirit husbands and spirit wives. Quote, they turn into a woman and they sleep with a man and collect his sperm. Then they turn into the man and they sleep with the man and deposit the sperm and reproduce more of themselves. So now when my parents yell at me and tell me to go back to school, I'm just going to show them this. This person has a doctorate. But that's not where that crazy quote stops. She also says, quote, they are responsible for serious genealogical problems. We call them all kinds of names. Endometriosis. We call them Muller pregnancies. We call them fibroids. We call them cysts, but most of them are evil deposits from the spirit husband. They are responsible for impotence. Men that can't get it up. Ah, that's why. She also claimed in 2015 that the Illuminati plan had been concocted by a witch to destroy the world using abortion, gay marriage, and children's toys. I was always suspicious of children's toys. But as usual, I encourage you to further research this. Perhaps this isn't the whole story being told, but it's all I could find on it. Alright, moving on to our next story. This also occurred in Florida. This is a callback. In Miami, Florida, a man has been charged with bank fraud for using PPP loan applications and spending the money on Lamborghinis. So for those who don't know, a PPP loan, that stands for Paycheck Protection Program loan, and it's been issued to small businesses in order to keep workers on the payroll throughout the coronavirus pandemic. But this 29-year-old in Florida thought fit for it to be spent on a $320,000 Lamborghini. He also managed to spend $5,000 of it at Saks Fifth Avenue, $11,000 at 2 Miami area hotels, and $8,530 at Graf Diamonds. How do you spend $11,000 at hotels? That's pretty impressive, and it does sound like he is actually stimulating the economy. You know, whether directly or indirectly. We all know that the economy is driven by consumption, not production. It's by destroying, not creating. Anyway, the criminal complaint reads, quote, there does not appear to be any business purpose for most, if not all, of these expenses. There's no business purpose for Graf Diamonds or Lamborghinis, or Miami hotels costing $11,000. More great work from Florida investigators. Now, the bank records obtained by the U.S. Postal Investigators shows that the man got almost $4 million in taxpayer dollars through 3 low-interest forgivable PPP loans. And he initially had requested $13.5 million. So here's the thing. This is why our tax money should not be randomly dealt out to quote-unquote small business owners. I think it should be up to us to decide where our money goes, especially in the most difficult times. It shouldn't be taken away and given to jerks like this. Obviously, it's the fault of the man, but it's also the fault of the people who gave that man money. The U.S. Postal Inspector went on to say, those purported employees either did not exist or earned a fraction of what Hines claimed. So, he didn't have all the employees he said he had, and the employees he actually has didn't receive as much of the funds as they were promised. Once again, the people handing out the money should have known better, as the Better Business Bureau website several years ago said, quote, his company has used bait and switch practices and other deceitful activities. So it's well known that this guy is he's not on the straight and narrow, as my grandpa would say. So maybe the government should do a little more research before giving $4 million worth of our tax money to criminals. Now, the man's attorney said, quote, he is a legitimate business owner who, like millions of Americans, suffered financially during the pandemic. While the allegations appear very serious, especially in the light of the pandemic, David is anxious to tell his side of the story when the time comes. Now, if found guilty, this man will suffer up to a $1 million fine and up to 30 years in prison for bank fraud. None of that's going to happen. You guys remember 2008. Now, the funniest part of the story to me is that while the news station was recording with this man, while they were interviewing him, a policeman walked up and gave him a fine of $100 for not wearing a mask in Miami. So I guess justice was served after all. Sure, he got a Lamborghini and $11,000 worth of hotel services. But, you know, you got a $100 fine for not wearing a mask. Justice is justice. Okay, so that's it for this segment. Stay tuned for the next segment. We'll go over a bunch of police stories and crime stories. There was a woman who thwarted a burglary with her bra. And also a county sheriff that directed his detectives to investigate a message for calling him fat. Brilliant. Okay, we're going to get back to that in just a moment. Please stay tuned after the break. And later on, I'll give you my top 10 crazy scientists, science stories, science experiments, just bizarre science stuff, which will be fun. We'll probably do several of these in the future, so stay tuned for that.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America's Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
McDonald's once made bubblegum-flavored broccoli in an attempt to seem healthy. Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News Podcast. We have a bunch of crime-related stories for you coming right up. In our next segment, I'm going to give you my top 10 mad scientist stories, mad scientists in general, and whatnot. Kind of a vague subject, just weird scientists. Alright, but let's get started with this segment. We're going to kick it off with a teen that was sent to juvenile detention center for not doing online schoolwork. So this was a 15-year-old student in Michigan, and a judge ruled that she violated her probation by not completing her online schoolwork. She's gained the reputation of a troublemaker by, quote, getting into trouble for fighting with her mother and stealing. However, it is said that she has cleaned up her act and has a nearly perfect attendance at her school. When asked about the situation, her mother said, quote, "It just doesn't make any sense." Her mother was not allowed to see her for an entire month, being that she was locked up in the Children's Village Juvenile Detention Center in suburban Detroit. A local judge incarcerated the child for not completing her online coursework after the school switched to remote learning as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. It should be noted that local advocates are outraged and say that they are unaware of any case involving the use of a juvenile detention as punishment for a child failing to meet their academic requirements. And the funny part of this story is that the executive director of the National Juvenile Justice Network says, quote, "Who can even be a good student right now? Unless there's an urgent need, I don't understand why you would be sending a kid to any facility right now and taking them away from their families with all that we are dealing with right now." So you might be a little confused because he said right now 6 times. But basically he's agreeing with the parents of the individual as well as the general community of Detroit that this young lady should not be going to juvenile detention because she didn't finish her homework in time. So due to the public lashback on this subject, my guess is that it won't last very long and that this kind of thing will not happen again because pretty much everybody is upset about it, including myself. Whether or not this young lady had problems in the past with the law, it doesn't have anything to do with her schoolwork. And also, her schoolwork was fine until COVID struck. So it's kind of an unrelated discrepancy in her personal relationship with herself. So I don't think the government has any job in, escorting her in chains to prison. My guess is they'll release her very soon. And if they don't, there will be a lot of lashback from the community, as there should be. I feel like the voice of the people. Alright, our next story. A woman uses a bra to try to restrain a victim during a thwarted burglary attempt. So to sum up the story, a man and a woman were arrested after they tried to burglarize a home while they mistakenly thought the family was at the airport. Now, they were actually incorrect. The family was not at the airport. And when these two burglars found out about it, the female burglar tried to restrain one of the victims with her bra before attempting to escape the home. The two criminals rummaged through this family's kitchen and stole an unknown amount of prescription drugs. It's all of a sudden becoming clear both why they did this. They were probably on drugs while they did this, and also they didn't really think this through. According to state police, the woman left the home and assaulted another person while threatening to shoot them and his family. During this time, her male counterpart escaped in a vehicle while troopers arrived on the scene. The man was taken into custody while driving under the influence and is pending toxicology results, which will affect the charges on him. The woman then re-entered the house that they burgled earlier. But thankfully the residents had left by that time and refused to come home. The state police then promptly showed up, and the burglar refused to leave the house that she was invading. According to the state police, quote, troopers gained entry through the window and took the lady into custody. They are currently awaiting trial being held in Jefferson County Jail, and therefore no more bra-related crimes are likely to be committed. One of the many crimes of the justice system itself. Alright. Time for our penultimate story. A Kalamazoo County Sheriff directs detectives to investigate a message calling him fat. So this message was sent over Facebook. It said, quote, "You're a fat ass who needs to go on a diet. Stop us from living. Come get me if you want me, tubby." Now, I've received this exact message multiple times on both Twitter and Facebook, but I never sent my army of deputies after the person who sent it. It just seems like a poor allocation of resources. However, this sheriff disagrees. He believed the proper course of action was to send his highest-ranking officers after the man who sent this message. And eventually, these detectives were directed to investigate the home of the man accused of sending the message. That is just brutal. It's actually really shameful. It's kind of gross that a person of the law would do this. And he didn't just send deputies or sergeants, he sent detectives, the highest-ranking people in his sheriff's office, in order to investigate this little message. What a peevish man. What thin skin do you have to be so offended by a little post on Facebook to send basically an army, a small army, at someone? It's so pathetic. However, the sheriff actually defended himself, saying that the message was threatening in nature. And he directed his employees to make contact with the sender and warn against threatening posts in the future. He sent his detectives to warn the guy. There are so many holes in this plot, it's unbelievable. Now, unfortunately, the detectives actually listened to their sheriff and went to the man's house and questioned him. However, the 48-year-old man denied writing the post and claimed that his Facebook account was hacked. Oh, why can't people be reasonable? It's so beyond me. Now, for some godforsaken reason, this news outlet brought this entire situation to a law school professor. And when questioned, the law school professor said, quote, "When you read it, your first response is that he's saying mean things. It reads kind of funny. It's so outlandish." It blows my mind that they're escalating this to an actual case, a legal case. The man went on to say, "I think elected officials have to expect this type of commentary. They can't be super sensitive to it." I believe that's an honest analysis of the situation. Now, back to the sheriff. In his defense, he said that he got the message after he made a post encouraging people to comply with the governor's stay-at-home order. Obviously a reasonable request, and it's also his job to do so. But he said that he thought the message he received as a response was an odd and suspicious one. And that's why he asked his detectives to look into it. Yeah, it's very suspicious why the man called you fat. Perhaps it's because you're fat? It's alright, buddy. I've got a little chub around the old six-pack. You know, the old love handles of fury. Now, if you read a bit more into this, you kind of realize that the sheriff started backpedaling. He realized what he did was just stupid and wrong. And you can further see that because he declined to do an on-camera interview. The sheriff went on to say, "I sent 2 detectives over to stop saying mean things, and that's a questionable use of resources and a bad judgment call." So he's well aware that what he did was wrong, and he's apologizing for it, and we should give him credit for that, at least. And we should also laugh that what he did was stupid. The man who wrote the message was later questioned by the news station and said that he thought the response seemed a bit over the top. He also noted that a lot of people say lots of things on social media and, quote, "those comments don't result in a visit from law enforcement." Which is obviously correct, but it is also obviously the same tone of voice that the message was written in. So I think it's also dishonest for this guy to pretend that he didn't write the message. Clearly he did. I don't understand why people don't want to live in a world of truth. If you call the sheriff fat, call him fat. Who cares? What are the detectives going to do? Arrest you for calling the guy fat? The sheriff eventually clarified, quote, "It seems to be a provocation where they're looking to provocate, but they're not looking to threaten. A lot of freedom of speech can be deemed not harmful because it's looking to provoke." Now, I read that quote earlier. Obviously, it's not intended to be a threat. Although it can be emotionally harmful. I don't think the sheriff of a police force should be threatened by this kind of... Should be emotionally harmed because of this kind of message. And since the sheriff knows this, he also goes on to mention that the man he has accused of sending the message has not been charged of the crime. This news station went on to ask several other sheriff officers how they would have responded to a message of similar merit, and they said that they would have just ignored it. Beautiful. That's how most criticism should be handled if they are false or if they're just there to provoke. They should just be ignored. By escalating it to an actual issue, you're only proving the merit of the actual provocation itself. But as dumb as the sheriff's actions were, I'm glad to see that he walked it back. He clearly knows that he was wrong. And as a little wrap-up, he is going to run for a 4th term in 2020 to be sheriff. So, place your votes. All right, final story of the week. You guys have probably heard about this. There have been a bunch of seeds that have been shipping to random U.S. mailboxes, and many people accuse China of sending these because it says from China to U.S., so that's why they think China sent them. Now, it's most likely that there's no nefarious reason that these are being sent to America. It's most likely part of a, quote, brushing scam. This is according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. A brushing scam is basically when you send free samples of your product out to people and then claim that you got stellar reviews for the product in an effort to boost your lackluster sales. However, the U.S. Department of Agriculture is nevertheless saying, quote, do not plant your seeds from unknown origins. There's so many euphemism jokes I could make. Anyways, be on the alert for these kind of packages. They arrive in normal packaging, usually a light gray or beige envelope. Usually they are marked as containing jewelry. However, they obviously don't contain jewelry. They contain plant seeds. Now, the problem with this is that some states, including Washington and Alabama, have labeled the shipment as, quote, agricultural smuggling. They don't want these seeds to introduce any invasive species into the plant life of their states, in fear that they will destroy native plants, insects, or severely damage crops and bring diseases. Which probably isn't the case, but nevertheless, don't just go around planting seeds that you got randomly from somebody you do not know. It could end badly. Even though it seems like a very insufficient way to attack another country. And if you do receive these seeds, please contact a local plant regulatory official. That's what your local state recommends. It's kind of goofy that we even have a local plant regulatory official. But whatever, why don't you actually give them something to do during the day and let them know that you received a random package of seeds from China. Alright, that's going to be it for this section, ladies and gents. But stay tuned. Next segment, we're going to get into my top 10 mad scientists. Some weird stories and facts about science. It's going to be a heck of a time. I'm excited about it. I hope you are too. So why don't you stay tuned, god dang it.
The GSMC Life and Happiness podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
There are more public libraries in the U.S. than there are McDonald's. Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News Podcast. That's oddly enough your second McDonald's fact of the day. But we're not here to talk about that. What we're here to talk about are the top 10 most odd, mad scientists who ever lived. Or maybe some weird science facts. I don't know, just weird science top 10. Let's get into it. Now, I have to warn you, this segment's going to be slightly creepy, mad scientists. There's a lot of real-life Frankensteins in this story. That's just to sum it up. It's going to get slightly disturbing, but I'm always going to put it in a kind of a goofy, hilarious tone because I find it somewhat insane. So keep that in mind as we go through this last segment. If you're the kind of squeamish person that's not okay with that kind of thing, perhaps this is one you want to skip. Alright, number 10, Paracelsus. So this was a young man, lived back in the goddamn 16th century, and he is known as the father of modern toxicology. He was a practicing physician, botanist, and occultist, as he was crazy enough to believe that he could create a living homunculus, which is simply a scientifically confabulated human being or similar creature. I don't know if you guys watch anime or not. But basically it's a man-created person. And how did Paracelsus believe he could do this? He kept his semen in a warm place and then fed it human blood, which is how all good scientific studies should begin. He took thorough notes on every single study that he took, and he even left detailed instructions for any others who might wish to try it out for themselves. He believed that this method was, quote, genius, and that it was the same science that led to wood nymphs and giants in past history. I guess he wasn't really a history buff, because there aren't a lot of nymphs and giants in history. I mean, the closest you get is that giant Goliath who was slayed by the nymph David. But besides the Bible and Hans Christian Andersen, there isn't a whole lot of that thing going on in actual history books. But I would encourage you, if you're looking for a rabbit hole to dive into, metaphorically speaking, I would recommend Googling homunculus creation. That's a great way to waste a day. You can just Google videos of people trying to create homunculus, injecting weird substances into eggs, and it's pretty interesting and slightly gross. So if you're into interesting, gross things, if you've made it this far into the podcast, clearly you're into that kind of thing. So why don't you, Google homunculus and get digging. Alright, number 9, Jose Delgado. So he lived around the 1915s all the way to 2011. And he received several prestigious professionalship awards at Yale University. But his research is not really known to be as equally prestigious in his early life, as he used the psychology department at Yale to deal with what he considered to be the most important science experiments of his time, and that experiment is mind control. So what he would do is he would insert electrode implants into the brains of primates and attempt to use a remote control which gave off different radio frequencies in order to make the animals perform complicated movements. I don't know if it really counts as mind control if you have to insert electric probes into the thing's brain before you can actually control the being itself. It seems like a bit overkill. One of his most ludicrous experiments was using this electric implant in the brain of a bull and putting himself in the ring with the bull and attempting to stop the bull as it charged him before he got trampled, which I think would have been an excellent way to end this experiment. Hypothesis: the bull will stop before it tramples me. Result: the bull trampled me. But most disturbing of all, he actually wired up 25 different people to this experiment. And what he discovered is that the device only impacted their aggression. It turns out if you stab people's brains with electrodes, their aggression goes up a bit. We're going to end with one of his greatest quotes. Quote, "We must electronically control the brain. Someday armies and generals will be controlled by electric stimulation of the brain." So yeah, Jose Delgado, slightly insane. Maybe somebody should start controlling his brain. I mean, he made it to Yale, so clearly he was smart. He was just slightly a mad scientist. That's what this section's all about. Number 8. Francis Crick. Now, this is going to be a pretty short one. Basically, his credentials are that he attended the University of Cambridge and ended up working for them. In 1962, he received the Nobel Prize for his scientific work. But he was the one who actually popularized the sci-fi, the kind of sci-fi theory that humans were actually seeded from aliens and placed on this Earth as an extraterrestrial experiment, which is kind of silly, but I'm glad he came up with it, because otherwise we wouldn't have The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So ultimately I'm thankful for good old Francis Crick, even though he's a bit mad in his scientific ways. But I don't know, you might disagree with me. Why not leave me a comment below? Perhaps I'll address it in the next episode if it's an interesting enough comment. I love you guys. Let me talk to you. Come on. Alright, number 7, Stubbins Firth. This is also going to be a nice little short one. So Stubbins Firth was obsessed with the idea that yellow fever is not contagious. And so I'm going to give you a quick warning here, folks. It gets a bit gruesome the way he tests this out. What he would do is he would take fluids of people with yellow fever, be it blood and vomit and saliva, among other things, and he would smear himself in it, be it his eyes, or sometimes he would even cut himself in order to get a deeper injection of the fluids into his own body in order to prove that he could not contract the disease from the fluids to his own self. And guess what? The interesting thing is he was right. After covering himself with all these fluids, he proved that he did not get the disease. The only problem is, he got these diseases from already dead patients, and of course, people who already died from yellow fever are no longer contagious. So he kind of did all of that for nothing, and it's kind of fun to see people pay the price of their insanity. However, it is enduring to see their devotion, no matter how crazy it is in the end. Alright, number 6, William Buckland. So this goof lived around 1784 to 1856, and he was a contemporary of the great Charles Darwin. And he is most famous for being the first man to pen a complete description of a fossilized dinosaur, which is just fantastic. He was a great, great scientist. We're not going to focus on his scientific endeavors. We're going to focus more on his carnivorous endeavors. He ate a lot of weird stuff. I'm going to read you a quick list of what he ate. Quote, hedgehogs, potted ostrich, panthers, porpoises, puppies, and even bat urine. But it should be noted he was not entirely crazy, as he regarded garden moles as disgusting. And he once said that his proudest achievement was, quote, having eaten the shrunken heart of King Louis XIV, which is pretty impressive. I wish I could have achieved that, but unfortunately I wasn't alive back then. Otherwise, I totally would have tried it. He is a personal hero of mine and will forever be. Alright, number 5. Sergei Brakhanenko. If you couldn't tell from the name, he was a Soviet scientist, and he is most well known for creating an important advance in Russian open-heart surgery methods. However, how do you expect he came across this beautiful method of saving people's lives? Well, he performed many grisly experiments on animals. Once again, this is not for the squeamish. He performed all of his experiments on live animals, and his goal was always to do as much damage as possible while still keeping them alive, all in an effort to find out how he could keep humans alive. Some of his most famous experiments were decapitating animals in an attempt to keep them alive as long as possible after the decapitation. He would hook it up to air and blood supply apparatuses, and he actually found some moderate success and garnered the quote title Soviet Frankenstein, which is a brilliant comic book name. But there is some good news about this young Brakhanenko. You can actually go and watch his experiments on film. In case this podcast wasn't gross enough for you, go and watch his videos. They're even more disgusting. I can't do it myself. If you can, good for you. Number 5. Wait, we already did 5. Number 4. Ilya Ivanov, another Soviet biologist. This man convinced his own government to grant him permission to leave his country for the express purpose of breeding hybrid ape humans, which is a goal I think many of us have. Now, this was way back in 1926, and he actually performed his tests in Paris. There are many gruesome details where he takes dead people's genitalia and grafts it onto chimps in an attempt to fertilize them with human, Alright, we're not going to get too deep into this. Obviously, he ended up failing miserably. He eventually tried the reverse. Thank God, one of the few great things Stalin did is he ordered all of his scientists back into his own country for the war, and clearly insane scientist died within 2 years of his arrival. Beautiful ending to that horrific story of a terrible man. Number 3, Jack Parsons. This young man is a rocket scientist and also a noted occultist. He was caught on several occasions dancing practically nude around a fire in his own garden in what appeared to be a pagan ritual. Eventually, he joined the Scientology founder L. Ron Hubbard in an attempt to raise the mother of the Antichrist. I'm not going to go into detail on how the two managed to attempt to do this, but if you want some really disturbing thoughts floating around in your head, why not Google it? Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard attempt to raise the mother of the Antichrist. That's something you will definitely want on your search history. Now, unfortunately, Mr. Parsons has a tragic ending. He was killed in an explosion that some have suggested was down to a, quote, magical experiment. That's what I want written on my gravestone. Killed during a magical experiment. Once again, so many euphemisms. Alright, number 2. Robert G. Heath. This is another mind manipulation story. And he specialized in pleasure and pain receptors. And he actually found some success. Eventually he was able to create a chemical disturbance that resulted in, quote, virtual ecstasy. However, he also discovered the flip side of the coin, which were his pain receptors, which trigger the exact same emotion, only the opposite, which is not the exact same. This article is all screwy. He is believed to be part of the CIA's MK-Ultra brain manipulation project, and so if you want to delve deeply into that, you can, but we're running out of time, so I'm going to go on to my number 1. Obviously, Nikola Tesla. He's going to be number 1 on all my scientific lists, not only because he's from my hometown of Colorado Springs, but also because he's a complete nutcase. A genius nutcase, don't get me wrong. Now, if you know anything about Tesla, he created a bunch of artificial bolts in his experiments, some of which measured up to 135 feet long. He was a beautiful mind. It was really incredible what he did. If you want to search some of his inventions, what they could do is absolutely frightening. He also worked on some inventions such as the particle gun, which he believed would bring down tens of thousands of airplanes in only one shot, and he even believed in anti-gravity flying machines. And if you see some of the other experiments he's achieved, he probably could have achieved the anti-gravity flying machine. It's pretty impressive what he managed to do during his lifetime. But on the flip side, he also said that the only person he ever loved was a pigeon. So he never married, but he was in love with a pigeon once, which is just fantastic. And more importantly, he believed the pigeon also fell in love with him. Isn't that fantastic? One day we're going to do a top 10 just on Tesla, but unfortunately for now that's all I can give you. But don't worry, I still have enough time to thank you for listening to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I will also ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a goddamn nice review, because it really helps us. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, that would be downright fantastic. Thank you, have a good night, and I will talk to you tomorrow. Until then.